I have stated that each decade is a stage of grief, and that we are currently in the testing stage of the 2020s, which resides between the depression stage of the 2010s and the acceptance stage of the 2030s. But what will acceptance look like? What trends do I foresee in the pop culture of the following decade? Well, first, I will go over another way of looking at these decades. One that involves age and gender. And please don't take this too literally and take offense. This is my interpretation of these decades, not a condemnation nor an endorsement of them. So, the 70s has an old man theme. Take a look at the fashion, listen to the music, and just observe the pop culture in general. You can say that this is just vibes, and so be it. But nevertheless, the 70s had this old man vibe. Continuing on from this, the 80s had a young man vibe. The 90s had a teenage boy energy. The 2000s had the creativity of childhood. The 2010s was a moody teenage girl, and the 2020s is akin to a young adult woman. Using musicians to summarize this change, we've gone from Lemmy to Sabrina Carpenter. Think about me every night, oh, isn't that sweet, I guess so. That's how much the vibe has shifted over the past half a century. And this cycle has repeated throughout history. The previous testing phase was the 1940s and is very comparable to the 2020s, as they are both eras with a young woman vibe. The 1940s is famous for its pinup models, women painted on airplanes, and even where that infamous and iconic "We Can Do It" poster comes from. The previous acceptance phase was the 1950s, so the 2030s may be a parallel to this era. The 2030s will have an old woman vibe, much like the 50s. Another way to think of this is the pagan concept of the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. The 2010s was the maiden, the younger girl prone to depression. This also explains some of the immaturity associated with this decade, and also why this era is introspective and self-centered. The 2020s is the mother, the young adult woman who is more outward focused and a bit more mature. This fits the testing theme, as she is testing solutions and also being tested by reality herself. It also fits that this stage is the mother, as it gives birth to a new world. The 1940s gave birth to the world we all know today. However, that consensus has reached its endpoint, and now, in the 2020s, something new will be born that will likely linger for the next 80 years, ending in the next testing era, which would be the 2100s. Finally, the 2030s will be the crone stage, the wise old woman.
There's no hope for him now. He's suffering. You know we've got to do it.
It's fitting that this era will be acceptance, as the wise old woman resigns herself, accepts life as it is, and gradually makes peace with it. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. I think that the pop culture of the 2030s is gonna seem pretty lame and boring to most people. I don't really foresee any sort of artistic renaissance taking place until around the late 2040s. I think that the movies of the 2030s will be primarily sentimental soap opera type dramas, and that the video games of the next decade will likely be much the same. Video games will be interactive soap operas. As for music, I think it will be as tame as can be and completely lack any aggression or vigor. I hate to say this as a metalhead, but I really don't think there will be any new metal music in the 2030s. Sure, some bands and genres will be grandfathered in, but there won't be anything new or groundbreaking. I think the art of the 2030s will be kitsch, and it will be kitsch unironically. It will be safe and generic, wholesome entertainment. I predict there will be a decrease in political polarization. However, there will be an increase in censorship. Mainstream art and entertainment will be much more uniform. The messaging will be more agreeable to the average Joe than the polarizing entertainment of the 2010s and 2020s, but the messaging will also be more generic. I predict that the culture of the 2030s will be the exact opposite of the 1990s. Instead of provocative and rebellious art that is intended to disgust, outrage, or offend, the art of the 2030s will preach common sense platitudes in an earnest yet inoffensive way, much like a PSA from the 1950s. In the 2030s, people will be watching soap operas that take place during the Ukraine war and listening to music that more closely resembles Etta James'
My lonely days are over
and Buddy Holly
Hey, hey, hey.
than Nirvana or Pantera. Anything remotely edgy will be phased out of the mainstream and relegated to the fringes. I predict that video games in the next decade, when we get to the PlayStation 6 era, will have barely any interactivity at all. It'll be even more like watching a movie than video games already are. Of course, I'm speaking of the mainstream. There will always be indie video games and underground music, but the pop culture at large will be sterile and lacking originality. I know this is a rather bleak picture and not what anyone wants to hear, but I'm just being honest. I would be absolutely thrilled if I am completely wrong about all of this and an artistic renaissance was just around the corner, but I really don't think that's the case. And I can already foresee people saying I'm just being a buzzkill about this. After all, every generation thinks that the generation after them is lame. That is true. And I will admit that I have a fondness and bias for the early 2000s, and as of late I've even been having nostalgia for the 2010s, which for me has been a surreal experience. Maybe the next generation will just say, "Okay, Zoomer," to me, and maybe the pop culture of the 2030s won't be quite as boring as I anticipate, but I am very skeptical. I do think there will be some gems in the next decade, don't get me wrong, but they will be few and far between, and probably not in the mainstream. Throughout my Stages of Grief series, I have been discussing American culture and its decline. I think in the 2030s, this culture of the baby boomers will come to an end. The worship of the 1980s will fade away. The mythos around World War II will no longer have sway with people, and all the pop culture icons that are universally known will die off with Gen X. Cyndi Lauper and Back to the Future will only be known by the older people, and all the pop culture references in The Simpsons and Family Guy will be so alien to Generation Alpha that they might as well be ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Acceptance is about coming to terms with loss. And in the 2030s, we will come to accept the loss of the world of the baby boomers. We will come to accept that most of us will never become rock stars or live in a John Hughes type house. And we won't even be pissed off about it in a Fight Club sort of way. We will just say, it is what it is. Of course, America itself will still exist, but the American dream will be so obsolete as a concept that it could be rightly compared to manifest destiny or the divine right of kings. America will be less comparable to its Statue of Liberty and more akin to the statue of Ozymandias buried in the sand. And there will be a new myth that replaces both the American dream as well as the mythos of World War II. I believe this new myth will be formed in the 2020s and solidified in the 2030s, which means there will have to be a new bad guy. For the past 80 years or so, the bad guy has been the Germans, but that story has run out of steam, and people are looking for a new punching bag. I think it's possible that the Americans will become the new bad guys. It's funny I say this, as last year, when I made my Stages of Grief series, America sort of fell into that villain role, and I was apparently ahead of the curve, as I am Canadian, and I've noticed a massive shift towards Canadian nationalism in my country since 2025 began. And sure, Canadians have always talked trash about America, but before, it was much more superficial. It was more like playful banter between two bros who like different sports teams. In 2025, however, the hate that Canadians have for America seems much more real, and the rest of the world doesn't seem to care for America very much either. When I was criticizing America in my earlier Stages of Grief videos, especially the 80s one, I thought I was being pretty controversial. But I now think this anti-American sentiment is actually pretty safe to express. I think it's quite possible that the current iteration of America will be considered the new evil for the next 80 years. And note that when I say this, I'm not necessarily saying this should happen, it's just a guess at what will happen. People may laugh at the notion of this happening. This upcoming new propaganda is unlikely to persuade you or your generation. But what about your children or your grandchildren? When they grow up hearing stories of some deranged guy who threatened to invade Canada and take over Greenland. This is, of course, just one possibility. America may not be tomorrow's villain, but we can say for sure they will not be tomorrow's hero. The 2030s will be the final decade where the American boomer worldview has any traction on the global scale. Pop culture will stagnate as we await a new order to establish itself. Our acculturation continues.